Welcome back to a brand new episode of Demand Gen Chat. I'm your host, Tara Robertson, and I have a very special guest joining me today. Darrell, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Thanks so much for having me.
For anyone who hasn't met Darrell yet, Darrell Alfonso works in global marketing operations at Amazon Web Services or AWS. He's also a frequent MarTech speaker and author. If you're in B2B, you've probably seen his face on your LinkedIn feed. I know I do every now and then, and often
Mm.
sharing some fun takes on the marketing ops space. So, Darrell, I'd love to start with just a little bit about your current role and what your team is working on.
A little bit of background on me. I've spent my career in B2B marketing, just in a number of roles. I started in a startup so the first 4 years of my career, I was in the startup life at about like a 20-person company, and I've always just really enjoyed all things B2B, all things demand gen, marketing operations. Only recently have I been at a mega enterprise company. So I work at AWS, and there's, to give you some idea of it, my team owns Marketo. So there's about over 1,000 users that marketing users around the world that access our marketing platforms and tools, and we're really responsible for empowering them to create really great experiences for our customers. And yeah, so it's only been recently, about 3 years, that I've worked at mega enterprise. Most of my experience is actually at small and medium sized companies, and that's why I like to comment and write about the variety of different ways that you can approach doing marketing operations, doing demand gen, and then just B2B marketing in general.
And are you able to share what the main KPIs that your team is working on? It sounds like a lot of it is kind of enablement and setting up other marketers for success, but is there anything that you're measuring day to day?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple different ways that I think about this. I think that KPIs depends on your role, meaning that there's some things that we look at really closely, which is like our system performance metrics, our channel performance metrics. Being the owners of Marketo, we also own the email marketing metrics, ob-
Mhm.
obviously. So since that's what Marketo is primarily used for, even though it does more than that. Um, so, but I would say that even though we have goals, so for example, one of our goals is really improving the marketability, mailability, and overall health of our database to make sure that it's getting better in quality versus worse. And as you know, that kind of downstream leads to improvements across all of them. We actually report all metrics on a weekly basis. So even though there's some things that we're looking at, we still look at all of it. And I think that that's, I think at first I thought that was a little bit excessive, but but coming to Amazon, I think that it really, you know, helps you put your sort of analyst hat on and your sort of analytical skills, and really kind of pushes you to look at the entire picture. And I think that that's really important for just business professionals of all kinds. You know what I mean? Like even though, like, let's say you work in demand gen and you're trying to increase the number of leads or inquiries or meetings booked or something like that, um, it doesn't mean that you don't look at everything. And my favorite is to actually look at everything monthly. And then
Mhm.
one other thing that I really recommend people to do is that you're tracking your goals on a trending basis. Like, are we going to meet them? But when you look at the other metrics, you're also looking to just sort of see what's going on. And I think that that's something that I think a lot of marketers miss, because the data and information that you're getting is just really, it's just that. And you want to look at it as if you're looking, at your book of business or your portfolio, and you're just kind of seeing what comes to the surface. And that's when the most exciting insights happen. Things that you don't expect to happen, things that you didn't plan for, things that are working that you may have thought, wouldn't work. So that would be my recommendation there. I also have one other comment. I don't know if you want to move on to a different topic, but there's something else that I
Yeah,
want to
no, go for
talk
it.
about when it comes to, yeah. So we have this really cool concept at Amazon and other places too. And it's
Hmm.
the idea of managing your inputs and then monitoring your outputs. And inputs means that these are things that you can specifically control and influence. And if you manage those correctly, then the output should follow, right? So in a marketing context, like let's say sales or sales qualified opportunities, right? Those are actually outputs. You don't have official
Hmm.
control over that, but you do have control over the number of campaigns that you run, the budget that you're spending, quality metrics on your campaigns, feedback from customers. Um, you know, so each team and each division has control over a set of inputs that you can really change if you want to. And if you goal yourself by doing that, um, you'll find that the output metrics follow. You know what I mean? It's kind of like if you've read Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's a very similar concept where like you
Hmm.
manage the daily habits, and then if you do those right, long term, you'll meet your goals. But you're not like you know managing your that output. You're managing actually what you can control on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's a really cool concept and something that I try to think about often.
Yeah, we might have borrowed this from Amazon actually, but we follow something called actions, yields, and expected outcomes. So instead of setting
Nice.
KPIs for every campaign, we just kind of say, roughly, here's what's happened in the past, here's what we expect. And then obviously we're taking some educated guesses in there, but that's how we kind of build backwards from our targets.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. That's a good way to look at it. Hmm.
And I'm curious because you're the first ops person I've had on here. Usually I'm talking to demand gen marketers like myself. So, how do you help, let's say, the demand gen, the channel owners with their targets and building up their KPIs and their goals?
So the way that we look at it is that I think we recognize the idea of conflicting interests and we
Hmm.
embrace it in a way where there's healthy tension between the two. So, from a support perspective, we're creating the tools and the processes, the guardrails, the training, so that marketers can run as fast as they want to. Like we're like
Hmm.
we're empowering them. Um, the way that I like to put it, and I've said this on social media before, but like marketing ops is kind of like the pit crew on the racetrack. And let's say the demand gen team is driving the car. They have to stop every now and then to refuel, check your instruments, change out the tires. And when that happens, the demand gen team can actually go faster than if they didn't stop. Right. So it's a really great analogy because the entire group, the driver plus the pit crew operate as a team, and only when everyone works together can you win the race. So I like that
Hmm.
analogy. So that's how we support people, but naturally, demand gen tends to have unless you're a little bit like unless by nature you have a very long term culture, they have short term goals usually,
Hmm.
um, and they're trying to meet this. So it's actually our job to look long term to make sure that they can continue to hit goals in the future, and that our customer experience stays of really high quality. So when those things clash, you end up usually with some sort of good compromise. And I think that's the way that I look at it, because if if everything was run by demand gen, you would have this sort of law of diminishing returns, and things would slowly
Hmm.
kind of break because you're moving a little bit too quickly. If everything operated from the perspective of operations, it would probably be a little bit too slow and a little bit too safe. So going against each other, even though it may seem conflicting, is actually a good thing. And if you take the sort of emotions out of it, you end up in a really good place, like keeping your work separate from how you feel. and you're going to
Hmm.
argue, but in the end it'll make the entire program better because you're having those conversations and you're debating which is too much and which is too little.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that trying to meet in the middle analogy because you're right. Ops is often focused on long term, making sure things don't break, our database is clean, and at least in my experience, the demand gen goals are often what can we do this month, this week, today to bring in those leads for sales. So I'm curious from your perspective, how can demand gen marketers meet in the middle? What can we do to kind of explain to ops our side of the story, maybe, or if there's anything else we could do to kind of again bridge that gap and meet in the middle?
So there's two things. I'll give you like the high level way that I think that your mindset should be, and then I'll give you like a practical way to do it.
Mhm.
So first of all, I think that no matter what your role is, the best way that I think of, because you got different groups, you have like ops, demand gen, sales, brand, everything like that. Rather than think of yourself as a specific group, my recommendation is we always should think of ourselves as like business practitioners or business professionals that have a specialty. And that's in that way, you think about the business as a whole, what makes it run, and you think about customers. And if everyone thinks that way, but then contributes their own specific piece of the pie, it works a lot better. So even though I'm in ops, I know that it's important that we meet our revenue and demand generation goals. I know that it's important that we throw events, that we do things fairly quickly. So
Mm.
so this sort of like separate group thing means separate personalities and separate perspectives isn't necessarily true. It's always everyone thinking about the business and the customer and then how they fit into it is the better way to look at it. So at a high level, that's how everyone can kind of come to a compromise. I think that when it comes to if you're having trouble with it, there's something called over, under, and just right. And you want to take each of your either goals or tenants or principles, and you want to develop different scenarios where you know what is when you're over indexing, when you're under indexing, and what an example of right is. So my um, we have something called bias for action, which is one of our leadership principles, and it means that we move quickly. Now, over indexing on bias for action would look like no planning, um,
Mhm.
no understanding of if something is working or not, and then implementing things on almost a throwing spaghetti at a wall sort of fashion, right? Which is what people make the mistake of when they think of bias for action. They're just like, we're just going to do this just because, and we're just going to see if it works or not. When that's not necessarily true, you end up with chaos and a really bad customer experience, to be
Mhm.
honest. And then under indexing for bias for action means that you're having like analysis paralysis, right? There's so much planning. You're scared of what you should do because you're afraid of making mistakes. And all of your projects, you see that all your projects are delayed and you always miss deadlines. That's under indexing. Um, so it's up to us to try to figure out what just right means, and that could mean something like, and you want to define this for your own org. I think it's very different for enterprise versus startup, but that could mean something like you have 80% of the data. You're 80% confident it's going to generate some sort of goal. Um, you you're moving quickly, everything's not perfect, but the customer experience is still seamless, right? So by defining just right when it comes to demand gen, I think that you can chart a course that's very balanced and takes into account both
Mhm.
short term and long term.
Yeah. So it's something you probably just have to get in a room and talk about what just right looks like to everyone and kind of get on that page before you just start throwing requests over to marketing ops that have no context and aren't connected to anything else.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that if you do the first part, which I said, which is like being a
Hmm.
business professional first, it becomes much easier, you know, because
Yeah.
you're already thinking long term. You know what I mean? You're already thinking, you know, here are the goals that we have to hit this quarter, but we also like next quarter we're not starting from scratch, and next quarter we don't want to, we don't want to destroy our relationship with customers. Like the most common
Hmm.
example is like over emailing. This is like one of the most
Yeah.
common examples if you're trying to drive something. And when you over email a list, you may get incrementally more registrations for an event, but you're also going to drive more unsubscribes and you have more people tuning out. So it makes it even harder to do it next quarter. So you
Hmm.
have to determine what over is and what under is. And it really, and that's very situational, I think, depending on how engaged your audience is.
Hmm. Yeah, off speaking on that note, you had a really good post on just marketing ops don'ts in general on LinkedIn that I came across. So I'd love to hear. I think this was
Mm.
posted a few months ago now. Obviously, over emailing is a huge one that people come across all the time, and you can really burn your list. But is there anything new that you've come across as kind of a recent trend that you've seen in the don'ts, or maybe something that you just keep seeing over and over again?
I am so happy that that list was met with great reception because it to me it was a very practical, very in the weeds list. Like I literally wrote out that you shouldn't email Quebec if your email isn't in French and Canadian. So I was wondering, I'm like, oh, this might be a little bit too in the weeds for for LinkedIn, but I'm really glad that it resonated with people. Um,
I feel
so
like that's knowing your audience, right? Because ops is always in the weeds figuring that stuff out. So
that's true. That's true.
yeah.
Um, One of the things that I've been just thinking about, this is kind of random. One of the things that I've been thinking
Mm,
about, that I've been seeing a lot and I've been thinking about more deeply is like how to properly run experiments and do A/B testing. Um,
mm,
I think that when you have an incredible volume of traffic or audience, these really small A/B tests make a difference. But for most of us, especially when we're in B2B, we don't have that like luxury.
mhm.
AWS is a little bit unique though, because we actually have like
Yeah.
millions
You
and millions of
probably have a
customers.
lot to play
But
with.
yeah, we have a lot to play with. But it's much more effective if you test something with very stark contrast, right? So rather than say, oh, we're gonna subject line test register now for this webinar versus last chance to register. You know what I mean? The differences are so close, the similarities are so close that you don't take away a lot from the test. You want to make something where it's like completely different, whereas you're testing maybe urgency versus your text you're saying something like last chance to register for this versus the sort of caliber of the speaker, you know, like
Mhm,
what this CEO thinks about marketing or what this CIO predicts are the is the future of cloud computing. I think that that is much more much more actionable and more real too. Because if you really think about it, making a distinction between two very similar choices um, might just be you might just chalk it up to you know something small, some sort of like emotion or like whim that your user is experiencing versus really like versus the test really hinging on the fact that it's two completely different messages and which message resonates with your
mhm,
audience. So I think that you should think about that. One way to do that is you want to think about if either if one of the versions or one of the treatments wins, how would that change almost everything that you're going to be doing or everything that you're approaching? Right? You have
mhm,
this opportunity to really learn about your audience and really learns about what really learn about what resonates with them, and that's how you should be doing every single experiment. Um, Unless you're in B2C and unless you have super high traffic, I will say that especially with like the growth hacking trend and stuff like that, it's very common to test very small stuff like purple versus violet or teal versus light blue. You know what I mean? And it's
Right.
just like, oh, and then you'll see these webinars where someone's like, we saw a 20% increase because we used teal, you know? And when it comes to B2B and when it comes to most companies, that really doesn't make a big difference. So,
Hmm.
I did want to comment that one. That's something that I've seen recently, and I definitely encourage marketers to think about their A/B tests a lot more thoughtfully and more carefully,
Hmm.
and in a more like actionable way.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure a lot of people listening are in that boat of B2B focus, not a ton of traffic. So, say you're running a test and you do get a great insight or a great learning. How would you recommend we kind of catalog those learnings or organize them and share them back to the rest of the team? So that, to your point, it's not just a one time A B test and then we move on and test something totally irrelevant the next time.
Yeah, I think this one's a tough one. Here's some things that I think, a little bit more tactically that kind of work.
Hmm.
One is I'm a big advocate of centers of excellence, meaning that campaigns, campaign templates, even processes are all templated out and you have this repository to pull from. And
Hmm.
every time you come up with a really good insight, you improve the baseline. So you're going back to improving the center of excellence itself. Um, I think the other way, you know, you want you also want to broadly share. It's not for at Amazon. We share our results so frequently, and we store them. Historically, so people can go back and look. So it's never been too much of a problem in terms of documenting. Like for example, most companies have QBRs. We have MBRs, so it's like that. So it's like the quarterly version, except we do it every single month. So literally, once we're done with an MBR, the next week we start working on the next one. So it's very very much a regular thing to report out on what you're doing. Um, so I would do that. The final thing that would really help is to figure out some sort of goal that you're trying to get to that the tests support, right?
Mm.
So that you don't necessarily need to remember what every single test was. You're always just sort of moving forward when it comes to um, um, the goal. So like an example that we have is that we prioritize. We have so many emails going out on a weekly basis, like 1,000 campaigns probably that go out every week. So what we've been doing is we've built an algorithm to figure out which email goes first and which email goes second. And we're
Mm.
constantly testing that algorithm based on certain rules. Okay, you know, we want like this month we want to test regionally if large events make sense in this region versus lead nurture versus product announcements. And then once we pull that test together, we update the algorithm. So I think that in the same way, like your team doesn't need to be working on an algorithm, but you want to have some sort of goal in mind that you want to do. Like once you know that um, X will increase your registration rate for each campaign. You build that into the loop of every single campaign going forward, and then you create another test to reach that goal. So in that sense, you don't need to be as tactical about remembering everything that you've done. You've just sort of ingrained the learning, and now you're kind of doing it again. So I would say that those are some ideas that could help.
Yeah, I love that idea of building it into a center of excellence. We're a little smaller, so we're not there yet, but we're trying to build those out as we speak, which it's been a fun experiment to build. Um, One big piece of ops that I'm super interested in is just how cross-functional the role is. So I'd love to hear if you have any stories of just mistakes or maybe learnings you've made in working with other teams, could be within marketing or maybe with sales. And just what did you learn from that experience that maybe other ops marketers could take away from it?
Yeah, one thing. that um, comes to mind is that we're, my team is responsible for the process in which campaigns get executed and implemented. And
Mhm.
one of the things that I did last year, and I felt really strongly about it, was we implemented an incredibly high quality assurance check with each campaign.
Mm.
Some people might say that it was unnecessarily high, and it involved having a third party meaning like not like someone outside of Amazon, but a different team review your campaign before it could get deployed. I really believe strongly in that. And I had to roll this out to, again, there's like 1,000 people that run campaigns. It was
Mhm.
incredibly difficult, and each meeting that I had ended up being this really heated debate over why it was necessary. Um, and the first thing that I learned from that is that even though people may disagree with you, um, if you really believe strongly in the purpose of what you're doing and you take the time to listen to people, um, give their feedback, even though you may not take it, but hear them out and understand their position, it'll help you move forward when you're working with these difficult circumstances. That's the first thing that I learned. In hindsight, even though I do think that the incredibly high standard campaign standard that we rolled out um, would was probably right. I think from a practical, real life perspective, it was too much when I look back at it in hindsight. And we have since mitigated it and made it a little bit like easier to actually get your campaigns approved. Um,
Mhm.
so I think that that's also something um, that I try to advise people on. It's kind of like when you look at best practices, when you read like marketing books or you take classes or you take things, there's this idea of what is how it should be. And then when you implement it in practice, it may not yield the results that you think. And I think that that really makes it up to us, or it falls on us to be adaptive, to be empathetic, and to sort of be okay with doing things our own way, even though it may go against best practices. And I think that that's like the more balanced and like human way of like approaching work. So those are like some really big things that I learned from that. I would say pretty tough change management initiative that I had to do. But
Yeah, it
overall, I think
sounds
it was a
like it.
great learning experience.
I'm super interested in that QA checklist if it's something that you've ever shared, just because I mean, to be totally honest, I send most of our emails, and I'm lucky if I can get a second set of eyes on them half the time because we're just always behind, how things are just moving so quickly. So it's super interesting to see just how it would look at such a giant organization like AWS.
Yeah. So, when you're really agile, it's hard to do. But I
Mhm.
will say just one of the things that like you'll never go astray is like you always, even if it's not a marketer, you always have to have a second set of eyes. And it's because
Mhm.
we naturally get too close to our work. It's why writers have editors. It's why um, like our rule is that you can never push something live that you've built. That's our like
Mm.
number one rule. It always has to be someone else. And in that way, we keep it, because if you think about scale, um, when you think about processes and scale, things don't get better. They get worse and more complex. So you want to start very strong and have a really almost foolproof method in place so that you know that it kind of can keep growing. Because otherwise it starts kind of falling
Mhm.
apart. So that's something that I would do. I remember working for a smaller team. Um, we would have, even if it's like a, a agency or an intern or a graphic designer, be the second set of eyes if you don't have
Mhm.
another marketer, and they
Yeah.
always find something. They
Yeah, a
always
link
do.
or something. There's always something. Can't
They're
look at
always
your
just
own
like, "Oh,
work.
what is this?" And you're like,
Right.
"Oh my gosh, I was working on that at 10 p.m. last night. I'm sorry, I didn't see that."
Yeah,
But
that's
that's
my
okay.
draft.
That's like natural. We make mistakes. Like I even after like I send out an email to marketers and I've read it like 3 times, I'll look back on it
Mhm.
another day and I'm just like, "There's a typo," you know? And it's
Yeah,
just
it's hard to
very human
catch.
to do. So
Mhm. Yeah, I think that goes back nicely to at the beginning, you were saying a lot of demand gen marketers like to move quickly. Obviously, I'm in that boat of just trying to get our programs out the door. So if ops can be that person kind of not pushing, maybe gently pushing them to slow down a little bit and double check things, be that voice of the customer almost and make sure that, again, it has a second set of eyes on it. The experience makes sense when people click through that email and just kind of tie it all together.
yeah. And if you're the one building the campaign, you're also ops. So I think that that's like one of my, and it's actually one of my favorite.
Yeah.
I would say in a future life, if I were, you know, I definitely don't regret the hybrid roles that I've had in the past where, you know, you do both demand gen and ops
Hmm.
because it gives you incredible insight into how work actually gets done, and it brings a level of reality to your strategy. Because when you think about your strategy and you think about what you need to do to get to your goals, you're also thinking about the work it's going to take to get it done because you have to do it too,
Hmm.
right? So you're not going to
Right.
like overcommit or put something together that's really fuzzy. And this becomes very like this is the cause of a lot of the misalignment when people
Hmm.
create a strategy that they're not exactly sure if it can become a reality, right? They're just saying like, well, we're going to run engagements, we're going to really engage our customers with an incredible like digital experience. And then like what it really means is that there's like a landing page with a video. Do you know what I mean? And like that disconnect between strategy and actual execution is present in so many, especially large organizations. So I guess my thing is, you probably do a lot more ops than you think you do, and it's a very fun role to do both, at least for a little while because you get to learn both of it.
Great. So, any last thoughts just on marketing ops in general that you'd like to share with our audience before we move on to our quickfire round?
The one problem I see, I think, with most marketers is they don't do prioritization correctly. And we don't have enough time to cover all of the different frameworks that you do prioritization, but it's so helpful to take a look at your projects, whether you're demand gen or marketing ops, and then apply some sort of framework.
Hmm.
And then my favorites are impact effort matrix, urgent important matrix, and that's um, what's it called? Eisenhower. It's called the Eisenhower
Hmm.
matrix. And then there's also something called weighted scoring, which is probably one of the best. And it's where, based on specific goals that you have for the organization on different fronts, like revenue, customer experience, um, long term scalability. You rank your priorities based on those different ones, and then you come up with a score. And that's one of the best ways to actually prioritize your work. Prioritization ends up changing the entire way that you work because um, the focus of what you do ends up being ends up having a really big impact on the output of everything. So by spending a lot of time with prioritization, you actually improve the quality of your work in ways that you really won't know. And that is, I mean, with you might have like you might see this some of the time, but with ops, it's very prevalent where there's just too much to do in too little time, and we
Hmm.
spend so much time on the things that are least impactful. And at the end of the year, we look back and say, gosh, what did I do that whole year? I just put out fires the whole year. I just fixed bugs the whole year. And you look back and you're not really proud of the work that you did. And you can solve for that by spending a good amount of time with prioritization up front.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's always a tricky spot to be in is that putting out fires role for ops because often it's one person at a startup, maybe half a person like me doing it. So when
Yeah,
something's broken, it feels like the end of the world and it feels like you have to jump on that before your own priorities. But I like the idea
totally.
of taking the time up front and setting those kind of boundaries to make sure that
Yeah.
your own priorities get done. Great.
Mhm.
So moving on to our quickfire round, is there another marketer that you follow that our listeners should go check out and follow?
I've been following Amanda Natividad a lot lately. Maybe you've heard
Hmm.
of her. She's on like Twitter, especially and LinkedIn.
Yeah,
Super great stuff. Very insightful. She's one of my favorites. There's probably too many to name that
that's
I
a great
follow,
one.
but
Yeah,
she's one of my recent
one is good.
favorites.
We can link that in the show notes. And this one might not apply so much to ops, but I'm curious if there's something under the radar. It could be a tactic or a trend that your team has been talking about a lot right now.
We've been experimenting a lot with movable ink. Have you heard of that?
Hmm.
And it's
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it gives you the ability to craft emails in real time based on who the person is. I think that I have a sense that that's really going to be the future of marketing for B2B, because it already happens in B2C. So if you
Hmm.
think about the emails that you get from like Amazon or Netflix and things like that, they're actually crafted in real time when it gets to you based on who you are, right? So you have an email that's looking at your entire Netflix history and serving up something based on what they think you're going to like the most. So that is almost mainstay in some of the best B2C companies right now, but it's not in B2B. In B2B, we just do like maybe simple segmentation. Based on your industry, we're
Hmm.
going to send you this. Um, so I'm particularly interested in crafting digital experiences that are incredibly personalized for each person. Movable ink is a great way to do it, and I think that we're seeing some really great early results. But there's other ways that you can do it too. You do like velocity scripting, um, and you can do like other ways to make the experience really personalized. That I think is going to be really a heavy influence on the future of how we work in B2B.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really great example. And lastly, where can we go to find out more about you and follow your content? I think I know the answer to this one, but
Yeah, LinkedIn's my favorite. Yeah, yeah. I
mhm.
I try to spend some time on Twitter when I can, but I find that I don't know, for some reason LinkedIn I started writing on LinkedIn during the pandemic. And it just became a real good habit, and I just like the length of the posts that you can do. And I'm just so familiar with it. I'll probably start trying to do more of Twitter H2 this year, but LinkedIn for sure.
Great. We'll put those links in the show notes so everyone can follow you. Thanks so much, Darrell, for joining me today. It's a really great chat.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tara. I appreciate it.
Great. And thanks everyone for listening. I'll see you back here in 2 weeks with a brand new guest.